Hello, I'm reporter Julie Spencer, and I'd like to welcome you to Newsline Iowa City. I hope you'll join me today as we take a step back in time and visit one of the oldest schoolhouses in Johnson County.
The school here on 5th Street in Coralville was built in 1876. At the time, it was built to replace a smaller school that sat, we think, across the street. It was built by the Coralville Independent School District, so this school was the only school in Coralville, and it was built to serve the people living in Coralville, which in the 1870s was a rapidly growing community because of the mills along the Iowa River, as well as serving the students, the children who lived in the vicinity of Coralville. It was used as a school continuously up until 1948, when Coralville Central opened. They actually opened in 1949, and Coralville Central School actually replaced this one. It was used for one more year in the early 1950s when Central was already so overcrowded, and then it closed for good. In the 50s, for a while, it became a Coralville Teen Center. It was eventually transferred to the the Iowa City Community School District when Coralville merged with them in the 1960s. It was used for storage for many years until the Johnson County Historical Society approached the city about restoring it. It was the Society's main museum from 1983 until 2006, when we opened a museum along Quarry Road in Coralville, and in 2001 and 2002 we started restoring it back to a schoolhouse museum, so that the first floor is restored to the 1870s, the first decade the school was used, and we are completing the restoration of the second floor, which will be a schoolroom in the 1940s, the last decade the schoolhouse was used. As I mentioned, we interpret the first floor as a 1877 to 1882 classroom, which is the first era of the school's use. We think that classes were first held perhaps in the fall of 1877. And you can see the rows of desks that the students would sit in, most likely the younger students toward the front and the older students toward the back. Kids ranging in age from first grade or primer level to 8th grade would be attending the school here and could range in age from 4 to 21 years of age. We have in the school lunch pails, similar to what students might have brought in the 1870s and 80s if they brought their lunch to school with them. On each of the desks there is a slate, and slates would have been used in the 1870s and 80s more than paper for the students to do their exercise, whether it's ciphering exercises, that was arithmetic, or handwriting, penmanship exercises. McGuffey was a very well-known and popular writer of textbooks in the 19th century. He started writing textbooks sometime in the 1820s or 1830s. In addition to having exercises for learning how to read, they might have stories. In the primer here, they're very basic, but as you get into the second and third reader, most of the stories, in addition to teaching the children how to read, also have a moral, and that was very common with the McGuffey readers. Also in the middle of the room here, there is a stove, and at least in the early history of the schoolhouse, would have been used for heating the room, perhaps downstairs and then letting the heat rise upstairs. The stove would be either in the center of the room like we have it in some schools. You'll see it's in a corner in the back of the room. Either somebody from the school district would come and start the stove in the morning before the students arrived, or the teacher would be paid extra and be expected to come and get the fire going so the stove was already hot by this time the students arrived. It wasn't unusual in the 1870s to find an American flag in the classroom, probably not in front of the school like we think of now, and probably not on a pole, but hanging somewhere on a wall. Toward the front of the room is the teacher's desk, and the teacher's desk often in a school, and we know in this one, sat on a platform. On the desk have the teacher's school bell. Our school also has a bell on the top of the building that the teacher could use to call students into class at the beginning of the day. On the teacher's desk also is a Bible. So there wasn't the concern in the 1870s about using the Christian Bible. Also on the teacher's desk is a copy of a class list from 1879 and 1880. You can actually see this is from one room of the school, 41 students. And these students range in age from, I believe, 9 to 19. Also in the front here we have a dunce cap and some information about discipline. Now, discipline in the 1870s and 1880s was very different from discipline in schools today. The goal often was to humiliate students if they did something wrong and make them uncomfortable. With the dunce cap, students would sit here and have to balance the dunce cap on their head while facing the wall. The rest of the kids would laugh at them. Not only that, they would miss their lessons. Over on the desk here, we have examples more of McGuffey readers, but we also have some examples of materials used with penmanship. There were different styles of penmanship, different types of writing at the time. What was most popularly taught was the Spencerian style of writing, and so we have Spencerian lesson books as well as copybooks that students would use when they got older to actually practice their penmanship. And penmanship at this time was very important. Of course, there were no typewriters, no computers, so having good handwriting, especially if you were going into business or whatever area you were going into, was very important. And so they spent a lot of time on handwriting, probably more so than in schools today. In the case here, we have some actual materials, a couple things actually used at this schoolhouse, other things that are from other one-room schoolhouses in Johnson County. A lot of students, once they graduated rural schools from the 8th grade, they didn't necessarily go on to high school at this time. So 8th grade graduation was a very big deal. You can see in the back that there from 1908 is actually a group of 8th grade graduates, these from all the county schools. We've got some button-up shoes with a button hook, and at this time girls and boys would have to use a button hook to button their shoes. There's actually an autograph book that belonged to someone who attended this school in the 1880s. We have an actual Spencerian copybook from about 1880, an actual slate, some inkwells. There's an actual 1879 McGuffey's Reader, an Iowa physical geography book, and there is a Ray's New Practical Arithmetic. There is also a teacher's contract, and it is from 1895, and she was paid $25 a month. Here we have a recitation bench. When teachers taught students from primer level through 8th grade, she would meet with the different classes. When it was time to meet with the third reader class, she would, or he would bring them to the recitation bench and teach them while the other students would work on assignment. Here we have curiosity cabinet. Oftentimes schools would put together, classes would put together what was called a curiosity cabinet that often featured things that students collected either on their way to school or during travels or things that they found, things that teacher brought in, and that could be part of the science lesson. Teachers had to teach music as well. We have a piano in our school. Not every school was fortunate enough to have a piano. It depended on what the district could provide, and the district usually was made up of just the group of farm families or a group of families whose children attended the school, and often things like this were donated by families rather than purchased by the school. But often schools would have fundraisers, box socials, and so forth in order to raise money to purchase extra things. We have a pail of water and a washstand, so there would be no running water in the school, which means the bathrooms would be outside, and also there would be no water fountain for kids to go get a drink. The bucket of water would be used for kids to drink out of, to fill the wash basin. As far as we know, there was never a well on our property, and so it's likely that in the morning the teacher would send a couple of students to the nearest well in order to fill up the water bucket. In the alcove here, this is where the students would enter. We have a lot of lunch buckets here. Visitors to the schoolhouse can get a chance of some of the different types of lunches and foods that scholars might have brought with them to school. We also have out here some examples of clothing that girls and boys would wear to school. You would probably have 1 or 2 outfits for school that you would just wear over and over again. So they didn't have as many pieces of clothing, and it might be expected by your parents to last all year, 1 or 2 outfits for school. On this side over here, we also have games that when we have classes here, they can use as part of their recess outside. The sticks that are here and the small hoops would be used to play a game called Graces. The big hoops are for hoops and sticks, and the goal was to try to see how far and how fast you could roll that hoop. We have stilts, which kids might have played with here or at home. The 1876 Coralville Schoolhouse Museum is open on a regular basis during the summertime from Memorial Day weekend through October 31st. It's open Wednesday through Sunday from 1 to 5. During the rest of the year, it's open by appointment, and we are open for groups to come and spend some time and get a tour of the schoolhouse, as well as school classes and other groups and so forth. So we invite people to come out and view the schoolhouse, take a tour, explore it on their own when we're open. And if you have any questions, you can call the Johnson County Historical Society. We also invite people to walk on the grounds. We have a country school patio that basically is a tribute to all the country schools in Johnson County, and it is within a historic garden. So we invite people to come out when the weather gets a little nicer and take a look and experience what it was like to go to a one-room school. And in Johnson County in 1900, there were over 150 of them, so this was a common experience at the time.